How you doing?
I'm good. I'm just getting moving. Just
Well,
finished my breakfast.
thanks for meeting in the morning. I'm based in New York, so
I
it's
figured. No, my pleasure. It's good. It gave me an excuse to get myself up and moving today.
there you go. And with that saying that, does it ever get old hearing that you look exactly the same as you did like 20 some odd years?
I wish I personally felt the same. I certainly don't feel the same. You take it while I can get it because I don't know how much longer that may last.
I guess it takes waking up the next morning after like the real TV awards. Takes a little bit more time.
Yeah, it's taken a couple of days to recover from that.
But how was that experience?
It was a blast. I haven't done anything like that in 22 years, so it was a bit of a flashback. It's and as many people know, it's not generally my thing.
Mhm.
Um, but I actually enjoyed this. It was fun to hang out with the crew.
I always wonder, since you started on reality television so early, like what is your relationship to reality TV? Or were there stars there, reality stars there? You're like, oh, I can't believe I'm actually getting to see this person like up front and close.
Honestly, it was cool. The drag race crew was there, and that was cool. But I feel like a lot of the actual people, the figures from the shows weren't so much there. It was more the production side that was there. So not a lot of faces I recognize. Um, and the only reality show and I don't even know if you can consider it reality, but it was in the categories. But I watch Alone. That's really one of the only ones I watch these days.
I don't even know that one.
Exactly. It's real life Survivor is what it is.
Wow, it sounds intense.
It is very intense, but lots of badasses on the show, especially the women.
But the real world experience, that can be an intense one. I mean, when
Yeah,
you
it's
you got
it's kind of
on,
like Survivor being dropped off in a house with six other people.
yeah. But it's interesting because when you started on Real World, there was already like people knew what it was, right? It wasn't like that first season of experimentation.
Right, this was
Um,
season 9. It had had quite a few runs beforehand.
so with that, did you know like really what to expect with that experience? I'm sure you can't prepare yourself for it.
I mean, I don't know if you can. I think you can understand the past seasons and you can understand the mechanisms of production, but in my case, I grew up in a small rural town in North Georgia. I didn't have access to cable growing up, so I really hadn't seen most of them. And I'm thankful for that because I think if I had seen it, it would have actually probably created fear in doing it. So I think it's beneficial. I hadn't really seen most of them. I had seen the New York season, the original, and that was about it.
And I mean, you really can't get used to being called an LGBTQ icon. Like, do you have like a different relationship to that part of your life now that so much time has passed?
I think for a long time I didn't have a relationship with that whatsoever. So many years had passed, it kind of started feeling like the original was a fever dream. Did that
Mm.
really happen? Um, and this revisit has been very affirming that it definitely happened. Um, and if you watch, you see what I share and talk about it very much impacted life in huge ways. But yes, it is very strange to be called an icon in any kind of way, because I definitely don't think of myself that way.
And with, don't ask, don't tell, and the activism around those years and getting right off of the real world, do you think you would have been that active within the community if it wasn't for real world, or do you think it would have taken a couple of years or
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have been at all. When I was cast to do the show, I really wasn't even out yet. I was really not even out to myself. In fact, doing this show, part of the reason I wanted to do it was a catalyst to force me to really own it and live it. Um, so I think, and if life had carried on in a normal way, it probably would taken me years to have gone on that journey on my own.
there's so much, positivity around, your inclusion on the show for so many viewers, right? Um, but on Homecoming, you do discuss that there was like PTSD involved and all of that within the show and afterwards. Were you nervous or apprehensive about talking about those topics during
Yeah,
Homecoming or?
I think, being vulnerable in any way is always a scary thing for any of us humans, but especially when you start talking about mental health where there's so much taboo around it. It was important for me to talk about that topic, not just to share my own personal journey and experience here, but I think so many people in the LGBT community, especially, have their own versions of CPTSD that they struggle with. They're not truly aware of what it actually is.
Mm,
We all go through pretty traumatizing things in our, or especially early lives. And I think that really gets forgotten today because so much has changed in positive ways, and many people in our country anyhow are able to live more openly and freely, which gives the false sense that all is well.
right.
But just because things have changed today doesn't mean that what happened in people's lives early on didn't happen. And that trauma is still there, and people are still coping with it and with coping mechanisms, but not getting to the root of what's actually going on with their mental health.
Mm. And I was talking about this to Melissa last week. You know, this was 22 years ago that you all were on the show. I can't imagine, like, you guys give yourself like a pep talk, like, all right, we're actually doing this. We're having these conversations with the producers. Like, how does that even come to be? Because you have seasons 1 and 2 doing the homecoming. So you knew it was coming.
So that's a great question. And oh, Melissa, love Melissa.
He's
Yes,
great.
we had lots of conversations. We actually didn't think they would get to us. We assumed that they would go in sequential order and they would
Mm,
never get to us. They would do the first, handful of seasons and then probably this would taper off and it would never get to season 9. We didn't realize that so many seasons prior to us would some of the cast would say no, which is how they got to our cast. Ultimately, we spent probably 6 months debating amongst ourselves whether we should do it or not. Did we want to open Pandora's box again? Do we want to revisit that? I think we had all done a lot of work in our own lives to move past it and have private lives. So, especially conversations between me, Melissa, and Kelly, we debated a lot the up and the downside of doing it. At the end of the day, let's be real. The monetary part of it was a big reason. We all have children and families that we want to take care of. This is children's college fund. That's the logical reason behind it, but a lot of it had to do with conversations with production and ensuring that they understood why we were coming and what we were not coming for.
right.
We were not coming to make salacious, silly reality television. We were coming for intentional reasons, and it took those 6 months of conversations to build a sense of trust to go and do it. But then at the end of the day, all of us finally agreed because no one wanted to be the person who prevented this opportunity for the others.
Mm. And it's interesting that you say that, that you spoke to the producers about not making salacious reality television. We see that addressed within the homecoming season. It's funny because the relationship between, like, the person on that show, it's kind of interesting because before you didn't get that sense that, like, oh, we're breaking a wall by mentioning like a reality part of it, the whole production part of it.
Yeah, I mean, there was one thing we were also super clear about. That's what we were coming for, was to break down that wall. It was actually seeing the final product was actually really cool to see how much they allowed that to come through. We weren't sure about that until the final edit, and we don't get to see it until the public sees it as well. So we had no idea until it aired. But that was probably the main reason that most of us agreed to come back and do it, was to talk about taking down the fourth wall and the real life impacts of what it means to do something like this, which I think is so relevant today where so many people live their lives out in the metaverse, on social media, whatever the format. It's more relevant than ever.
The thing that I loved about Homecoming is they do make those natural parallels between what happened in the original season and what's happening on Homecoming. Of course, you had your meetup with Paul. Like, what is even the lead up to that? Because you guys have your whole relationship outside of the show.
Right, yep. So, Paul and I's relationship ended a lifetime ago, and we had not spoken or seen each other in 15 years, and I was okay with that. I would have happily left it there. That was one where production insisted that he be brought in, insisted and would not let it go. And I honestly agree. I finally agreed to it in the middle of filming because I started feeling like it's going to happen whether I want to or not. And I decided I at least wanted to have the control over how it happened. So I agreed to it like probably 5 days into filming. Um, and they brought him down. It turned out to be actually nice. I mean, to see someone that was a big part of your life that you haven't seen in 15 years is a cool experience that I think many of us would love to have in life, to get the second chance to revisit something that was left hanging. I think most of us humans think about that from time to time. We all have relationships that fell off in life, and we think from time to time, what would it be like to see that person? What would it be like to have those conversations? But 15 years had passed, and I had long since moved on. So it didn't need to happen for my sake, but I think for the bigger picture, it was important because it was a huge part of my original story.
It's interesting. It's like going through closure twice, right?
Very much, maybe even more than twice, because I think I had a few closures in my mind over the years.
Was there a list of things that you really wanted to address? Like that you
Yes,
were talking to producers, like, I want to talk about this, this, and this.
there were two key things that I was coming for that were my intentions in doing this. Um, Aside from the monetary compensation,
Mhm.
one, I really wanted to come back this time and address the topic of faith and religion in people's lives and how that impacts others negatively sometimes, especially in my own personal life. Slightly touched on in the original, but in my own personal story, it sort of slid by. There were, two people in the original cast who were very much rooted in their religious faith. Their belief systems really glossed over as far as how it impacts the LGBT community. This time, my main intention was to address that, and that's what happened. The other was the fact that I part of my own journey has been being HIV positive, and I came and I talked about that a lot in relation to COVID too. Lots of parallels there, and unfortunately, that was a missed opportunity. That story was edited out. It was a missed opportunity because there was an opportunity to reflect back on Pedro,
Hmm.
from the San Francisco season and his story and how medicine has changed so much over the past almost, what, 30 years now? A long time.
Yeah.
Um, you know, had Pedro lived in a different era, he'd be sitting here with us likely. And
Right.
I'm sitting here talking to you right now because of medicine. But unfortunately, that was all edited out. We
Well,
had to
now
make
it's,
room. We had to make room for the chaos warrior.
yeah, yeah. And you handled that conversation with Matt with such grace. I was wondering, like, what was that experience like? Because he definitely had a reaction to it.
Yeah, he had a more intense reaction than I was even aware of. I think he naively was not prepared for that conversation coming into that, which was a surprise to me. But I've had a lifetime, almost 45 years now on this earth, having these conversations. I'm from, again, I'm from rural South, Southern Baptist roots. Matt and I actually grew up in the same area, which is wild.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so he and I, very much fundamentally understand the mindset that I come from, and it was an important conversation. Unfortunately, I think Matt can't. People like Matt, it doesn't even have to be about Matt. They have a hard time separating the personal side of these conversations from bigger conversation, which is about the frameworks that we choose to believe in, choose to allow guide our lives. Um, there was, a lot more to the conversation, obviously, that was edited out. At the end of the day, what the conversation was really about is, Matt, you have 7 children. What if one of them comes out to you one day? How are you going to base that? That piece of the conversation, which I think was the most important, didn't make the cut. Um, I think people like Matt very much struggle with their faith versus what they generally truly believe in their hearts. And people like Matt I can sit and have a meaningful conversation because I know he does not come from a place of harm and genuinely wants to be the best person possible. Just not quite sure if he is at the place yet in his life where he is truly ready to rethink his framework. You know,
Right.
and people like Matt live in a bubble very much in their lives. I don't think Matt had been outside of his fundamentalist Catholic bubble coming to do this for a very long time.
And that conversation really surprised me because, like you were saying, in the original season, it wasn't really addressed. Like, yes, people's faiths were addressed, but not in relation to like the LGBTQ community.
Right. It was a huge missed opportunity. And I think that's because I was young at that time. I didn't really have the language to tackle it in an effective way that didn't just come off as being defensive.
Mm.
Um, at the time, I felt it just more important for those mindsets to be heard and shared. But I just didn't know. 22 years ago, I was 20, 21 years old, and I did not have the language yet to properly, effectively address that sort of mindset without coming across as being defensive. Where today I feel so solid in where I am. Also, the world has moved on and changed in huge ways, so you can no longer slide by as a young person saying, these are just my beliefs and I'm naive and I don't know better. As people in our 40s now, we have to own what we believe. So it was a very different picture this time.
And given this conversation, like this question sounds a little bit silly, but you must have had like a favorite day of filming because New Orleans is such a place of celebration. It has eclectic history, it has eclectic characters there.
I love that city. I try to go every couple of years for Halloween because it's my favorite down there. It's also my favorite holiday. So that was actually a really cool part to go back. Unfortunately, it was COVID. It was the peak of the Delta wave. So we
Mm.
actually, even though it appears that we're outliving, when we would go out in public, those were all very orchestrated events with anyone involved has been COVID tested, et cetera. So we weren't actually allowed to go out and really live life in the city, which was a big bummer. But one of the actual, I think probably the most fun day we had there, was when we went on back on the swamp tour again. I didn't do that the original time. I totally missed that. And it's sort of a quintessential New Orleans thing to do,
Yeah.
to go out on a swamp tour. So that was a lot of fun.
When I went there, I did not go. I was like Melissa, I was not about it. About the swamp tour life. Take me on
No
all the
thanks.
ghost tours, but swamp, no thanks.
I love a good ghost tour too.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this chat. It was such a delight.
My pleasure. Thank you.